The presidency of John Fitzgerald Kennedy is one of the most remembered to this day, one that marked national and global politics with its legacy of victories and failures, to then be violently interrupted with his assassination in Dallas in 1963, an assassination loaded with all kinds of mysteries. When former General Eisenhower left the presidency at 71 years old, he was succeeded by the youngest president of the United States, a unique character who promised a younger movement, with greater growth and more attention to the theme of civil rights, against the alleged passivity and lack of ambition of previous presidencies. Let's explore more deeply the life and presidency of John F. Kennedy, as well as the serious unknown suspicions surrounding the question, who were the real perpetrators of his death? Kennedy was born in Massachusetts on May 29, 1917. Kennedy was president for less than 3 years before his assassination at age 43. There have only been 5 presidencies shorter than his. Kennedy had a charisma, candor, and demeanor that ingrained itself in the hearts of many Americans, seeming to embody the hopes of an entire idealistic young generation of his time. After his traumatic death, the feeling of loss, mourning, and pain was very pronounced in American society. Furthermore, after him, a series of presidencies followed that only intensified Americans' distrust of their government. This must be added to the harsh shock of having witnessed an almost live and direct assassination of the president of the world's leading power in a society that prided itself on high trust in its institutions and public safety. The popular belief around what happened after Kennedy's death is that he was some sort of independent and anti-system president, and that the series of failed governments and missteps in national and international politics that transformed American society in the second half of the 20th century would not have occurred if Kennedy had not died that November morning in Dallas. However, numerous studies call this belief into question. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the son of a prominent Irish Catholic financier, originally from Boston. Kennedy was the first Catholic president in American history, a fact that was decisive in his election and in the way he presented himself to the power elites in the new generations of immigrant children who grew up in the United States with their values, beliefs, and attitudes after their parents arrived from all over the world in search of the American dream. Kennedy had to deal with certain prejudices regarding his religion in the 1960 campaign, when he had to say that he was not the Catholic candidate of the Democrats, but the presidential candidate of the Democrats who just happened to be Catholic. As the first member of the so-called immigrant community to become president, he became a role model for others like Barack Obama. John's father, Joseph Kennedy, was a man who amassed great fortunes with numerous investments and businesses, favored by his high position in the Democratic Party of the United States. In 1934 in the United States, he is one of the main financiers of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's campaign, and Roosevelt ingratiates himself with his financier Joseph Kennedy by appointing him president of the Securities and Exchange Commission with a view to regulating the financial market so that another crash like that of '29 does not occur. Harshly criticized for this, Roosevelt admits that he chose Joseph Kennedy for this job precisely because his relations with organized crime would allow the government to have an idea of how this dark world is managed. For being the best campaign contribution collector for the Democrats, Kennedy's father was appointed ambassador of the United States to the United Kingdom during the pre-war period when Neville Chamberlain's pacifist policy with Germany was at its highest level. From there, Kennedy absorbs massive sympathies with the Germans based on his view of the Jewish question and disdain for the European banking class. All of this changes when Churchill was elected and Kennedy's father is removed from the embassy and separated from power by Roosevelt. In response to this, Joseph Kennedy, who was accustomed to being close to power, makes it his great mission and that of his family to get close to it again. John F. Kennedy, therefore, grows up in the heart of a very wealthy and powerful family. He studies at Harvard. He wrote a thesis that would become a best-selling book about England's foreign policy with Nazi Germany. He then serves in the Navy, operates in the Pacific Theater, and from there receives a military decoration, something that always marked his career. And to defend himself from this, he said that if he had won with his father's money, he would have won by a larger margin. As a congressman, he represented the poorest district in Massachusetts, and this allowed him to have some contact with social circles from the humblest strata that would later shape how he would carry out his government agenda. In 1952, he was chosen as a senator for Massachusetts, and in 1956, his father again pulls the strings within the party for his son to be a possible vice presidential candidate in the presidential campaign. However, this time he fails. By 1957, when Eisenhower sends federal agents to Little Rock to defend the policy of racial integration in schools, Kennedy opposes this in total agreement with the Southern Democrats, who were in favor of maintaining racial segregation. After much political lobbying and propaganda, in 1960, Kennedy finally achieves the presidential nomination, but this came after not having had major legislative achievements. He did not push any law that achieved approval and was not a member of any influential committee, nor was he a legislative leader, nor did he have a good voting record consistent with party lines. At the time when Joseph McCarthy led the investigations against communism, Kennedy was the only Democratic legislator who did not oppose this persecution of communists for fear of offending the sensibilities of the immigrant Irish who were very anti-communist and supported McCarthyism. John Kennedy was perceived as a mediocre congressman at best average, an elitist young man with his father's money as a letter of introduction. His academic studies at Harvard or his military career mattered little. In fact, Kennedy acknowledges that due to his upbringing, he did not identify as much with the ideologies of the Democrats as he did with the inherent mechanics of the political game. His father taught him how to attain power, but not what to do with it. And that's something he had to learn on the fly as a man. With excellent advisors and press friends, his image as a candidate becomes very favorable to the country, allowing him to win a famous debate against Nixon despite having little to offer in terms of speech. Kennedy comes to the presidency with a slim margin amid rumors of fraud. Kennedy proposed to govern on a progressive program that was changing from the beginning. The Democratic Congress felt that it owed nothing to who had been a mediocre congressman. The Senate, for its part, majority Democrat, was divided between the Northern Democrats and those who supported racial segregation in the South. When he is elected, in his speech, he promises to use the powers of the presidency more actively so that the presence of the United States at the external level would be more effective. Kennedy strived to be recognized for his foreign policy prowess. Kennedy said that mistakes in domestic policy can defeat his party, but that mistakes in foreign policy would annihilate everyone. And shortly after assuming the presidency, his first international crisis presents itself, a war in Laos inherited from his predecessor. Despite his rhetoric, Kennedy was willing to support a neutral government in Laos because France and Great Britain were not going to support him, but his great diplomatic crisis arises with Fidel Castro's communist Cuba. After the Cuban Revolution that overthrew Fulgencio Batista, Castro carried out a policy of expropriating companies and closing casinos to elements of the American mafia that used the island as a base for colossal money laundering activities. Before Eisenhower left the presidency, the Central Intelligence Agency devised plans to allegedly recover Cuba, but they did not progress in it. The truth is that the Central Intelligence Agency gathered elements of the Italian mafia to recruit anti-Castro elements in Florida. What followed was the great fiasco of Playa Girón, also known as the Bay of Pigs invasion, a failed operation in which paramilitary troops of exiled Cubans sought to invade Cuba, only to fail spectacularly in less than 65 hours. Several promised United States military reinforcements did not arrive during the invasion. Furthermore, various documents suggest that the Central Intelligence Agency had warned Castro about the impending attack. Despite this, Kennedy assumes responsibility for the military operation, and surprisingly, his approval rating in the polls rose significantly despite the resounding failure. He was perceived as a president with a hard stance against communism. Regarding Kennedy, the anti-communism highlights the work at the international level that he seeks to cultivate in the region, especially during his visit to Venezuela to meet with Romulo Betancourt. His political police, trained by the security and defense elements of the Eisenhower presidency, were doing strong counterinsurgency work against left-wing subversives in Venezuela. After the failure of the Bay of Pigs crisis, Kennedy commits his foreign policy in Southeast Asia by not involving the United States in the crisis of communist containment in Laos. Shortly after the Bay of Pigs, the famous missile crisis arose, which originated from the placement of missiles on the island by the Soviet Union, causing strong military and diplomatic tensions between Moscow and Washington, District of Columbia. Amid the crisis, carefully managed by Kennedy and his advisors, a naval blockade of Cuba is established, integrating Venezuelan naval destroyers. This has led to strong negotiations with the Soviet Union that concludes with the withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba and the withdrawal of American missiles from strategic sectors close to Russia. Kennedy was not perceived as a national leader and had to seek the support of Southern Democrats before reaching across the aisle to Republican opponents who sought to end racial segregation. Therefore, instead of pushing the African American civil rights agenda to the maximum, he decided to do it in slow motion, raising wages, promoting subsidies, and implementing welfare policies that would ultimately benefit the racially marginalized segments. But in exchange for that support from the Southern Democrats, Kennedy had to nominate judges who supported segregation. Kennedy also promised civil leaders that he would end housing segregation by decree as soon as he came to power, but it took him 9 months to do so. He did nothing either about school segregation because he believed that the federal government had no power to interfere in educational matters. Kennedy was a man very prone to getting sick throughout his life. He always had some ailment, the most notable being Addison's disease of the adrenal glands that gave him that rosy tone in his skin and made him look swollen all the time. In fact, when he was diagnosed in 1946, his doctors had given him a year to live. On that occasion, and then with another disease in 1954, he even received the last rites in anticipation of an expected death. On the other hand, it was said that Kennedy was as promiscuous with medicines as he was with women, which leads us to another aspect of his life. Although Kennedy and his image advisors cultivated the public perception that he was a devoted family man, Kennedy was a man who loved to flirt with women everywhere, and that affected his decision-making power, since being in power made the Secret Service have to focus on covering up his affairs. Kennedy's libido was evident. Even Prime Minister Harold Macmillan recounts that he confessed to him that if he didn't have sex for more than 3 days, he would get headaches. For example, Kennedy had an extramarital affair with Marilyn Monroe after meeting her in 1962, a relationship remembered for her famous song, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." He also had affairs with other important women and even 2 of his secretaries. All of this worried intelligence agencies who saw these issues as matters that his opponents could use to blackmail him. As we have mentioned, in order to have stability in terms of national governance, Kennedy had to make many compromises. Part of them involved appeasing the rival factions of the Southern Democrats, who were staunchly opposed to civil rights reform. That's why in September, Kennedy orders his advisors to arrange a meeting with the governor of Texas, John Connally. Along with other congressmen, they aimed to facilitate fundraising for his presidential re-election, as well as that of the regional Democratic candidates. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy, his wife, and the entourage land at Dallas Loaf. In a presidential caravan through Dallas, Kennedy, Governor Connally, and their wives ride in the 4-door 1961 Lincoln Continental model. At 2:30 p.m., they pass through Delhi Plaza, waving to all the public. The First Lady of Texas, Nellie Connally, tells Kennedy that the warm reception was a sign that he was greatly appreciated in that state, and Kennedy replies, yes, it was clear that he was appreciated. He didn't know these would be his final words. On the way to the Stemmons Freeway, passing by the Texas School Book Depository, a series of shots hit Kennedy in the neck and head. Governor Connolly and a bystander on the sidewalk are also seriously injured. Kennedy is taken to Parkland Hospital, where his death is pronounced. The president of the world's leading power had been assassinated in broad daylight, surrounded by his Secret Service. The country was in shock. A man named Abraham Zapruder was in the crowd during the attack and recorded the parade with his 8mm camera. While others also filmed that day, he captured the clearest images of the attack. From this event and the strange subsequent events surrounding the investigations, many theories have emerged about who pulled the trigger, where the shots came from, and who were the perpetrators of this traumatic event. Once Lyndon Johnson, his vice president, assumes the presidency, he orders an investigation by the Warren Commission to examine the facts of the shooting, including a frame-by-frame analysis of Zapruder's recording. Due to everything that happened subsequently and has been revealed in the following decades, many presume that the Central Intelligence Agency Director Alan Dulles was in charge of completely manipulating the results of this committee. In addition, it has recently been revealed that alleged internal sources from the Central Intelligence Agency claim that this organization participated in this alleged conspiracy against Kennedy. Moreover, in the 90s, a law was passed that required all confidential documents about this case to be revealed by 2017. However, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have refused to publish all the documents and have only published some partial documents. The Warren Commission and the narrative of the other official bodies found the former Marine Lee Harvey Oswald to be the alleged culprit, who was arrested in a cinema that same day after murdering a policeman and being seen leaving the school book depository where a rifle had been found, and from where it is said the shots had come from. They also accused him of being the only one involved. But just 2 days after the attack, before he could testify in court, Lee Harvey Oswald was very suspiciously killed by a man named Jack Ruby. This was the starting point of all the disbelief about the official version, but there are many other things that don't fit into the official story. It is presumed that there were more than 3 bullets and that there was more than one shooter, which is what the official version says, since the 3rd bullet, which supposedly went through Kennedy and came out of his body, was found completely intact, leading some to believe that this bullet was planted there to hide the others. Another point of controversy is that the official investigations never took into account the testimonies of people who said they saw smoke and shots from a grassy knoll, nor did they take into account the testimony of the gunshot victim standing on the sidewalk, the 3rd victim of this attack. If there were one or more shooters beyond Lee Harvey Oswald, the narrative offered to the public that this was simply the product of a mentally disturbed man who in an act of madness shot, the president falls apart. To these oddities, we must add the existence of a second recording of the attack from another angle by a man named Orville Nix. This recording was sold to the press and a second copy was given to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It supposedly showed a second shooter who was on a grassy knoll with bushes. However, the government confiscated the recording, and Nix claims that when it was returned, there were pieces of the tape removed. In addition, the authorities failed to investigate the serious security breaches of the caravan's route by the Secret Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Defense Department. Another of the many reasons for suspicion was the window of time in which the shots were fired and the level of precision from a 6th floor of a bookstore. In short, we will probably never know who were the authors of this historic assassination, and there are many speculations around it. With this controversy ended the life of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who sought with his presidency to generate a series of social changes that he could not achieve due to the political commitments of those around him, and having prioritized international relations to the detriment of domestic politics. His personal life, complicated, coupled with his health problems, influenced the mistakes he made in making crucial decisions. His death led to a series of failed presidencies in the United States that had major national and international repercussions. Despite his failures and mistakes, his assassination seems to have been a reason for him to be considered a great president and congressman, even a rebel against the establishment, despite coming from a powerful democratic family. We hope you liked this video. Ronaldo Carrillo spoke to you. I invite you, as always, to leave your comments, share this material, and support us on our Patreon. See you in a next installment, and God bless you.